All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to ask you to go on mute if you aren't already. And we are going to give this just a quick second here, let folks arrive before we get started. It's exactly at 11. We appreciate folks coming in today. Let folks get here. Again, if you're not on mute already, please mute yourself. Okay. A couple other folks joining us. All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Andrew, and I work for the Oregon Community Food Systems Network. We're a network of organizations and agencies and other partners who work across the state doing food systems work, from supporting beginning farmers and ranchers to advocating for food and as medicine and all sorts of different things, and food, helping food hubs. And today I'm really excited. I'm the associate director at OCFSN, and I help manage the Farming for the Future working group, which is a working group of the folks across the state who provide services for farmers, and small farmers, beginning farmers, farmers um, of that type. And I'm really excited today that we have this great opportunity from offered by Rich Schwartz of Alder Street Consulting around the value-added producer grants. Yeah, we OCFSN has also administered some grants to farmers through our disaster resilience grant program. So we do a little bit of this direct farmer facing work, and I think we have a mix of farmers here and we have a mix of service providers. So it's a great mix of folks here to learn about this. Awesome opportunity, funding opportunity. I'm gonna lay out just a little bit of the structure today of what we're gonna be doing. Um, Please save your questions till the end of the webinar. If you have some clarifying questions, if something doesn't making sense, please put it in the chat, and I'll make sure to get that. If it comes up, I'll make sure Rich can answer that, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions on your specific questions around this grant program. So. That's kind of the plan there. When we do get to the question section at the end, folks will raise their hand and we'll do an order of raised hands to make sure we have a process for that. Um, so yeah, please stay on mute as we're allowing Rich to give the presentation. I'll let Rich introduce himself and Christina, who's here with the USDA as well, to provide that added context and expertise. But I think that's what I've got. Rich, what do you think? Is that good? And let you run it from here?
Yeah, I can take it from here. Thanks,
Cool.
Andrew.
Welcome.
So, hi, my name is Rich Schwartz. I'm based in Portland. I'm an independent consultant, and I started my business, Alder Street Consulting, in 2016 with an interest in and focus on improving the food system. And my specialty areas include business planning, feasibility studies, financial analyses, and value-added producer grant support. And I'm joined here today by Christina Reese of USDA's Rural Development. And Christina, maybe you can just say a word or two about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Christina Reese with USDA Rural Development. I am out of the Redmond office and I cover the entire state of Oregon. I've been with Rural Development for just shy of 7 years, and I've been doing VAPG behind the scenes, assisting the previous specialist. But now I am the specialist, so I will be taking over for the fiscal year 2026.
Great. Thanks, Christina. All right, we'll start with the agenda. So I'll talk a little bit about value-added producer grants, provide some background information, talk about the types of grants that are out there, and give some examples of each. I'll talk about the grant application process and provide some case studies. And then I'll talk about some tips for success. And then we hopefully will have lots of time for Q&A at the end. So starting off, what's a value-added producer grant? So these are competitive federal grants that are administered by USDA Rural Development. And by competitive, only about 50% of the applications actually get funded. And it's a grant program. So that means that any funds that you receive don't need to be repaid. It's not a loan, it's a grant. And the stated purpose of this program is to provide funding for farmers or farm groups in support of making more money. So the program is funded through the Farm Bill. Initially, this latest round was initially in the 2018 Farm Bill, and that was supposed to be just funded through 2023, but there have been annual extensions, and so that is currently what is supporting this program. And what do we mean by value added? So here we're referring to agricultural commodities or products that value has been increased in a number of ways. So the most obvious is a change in physical state, right? So you're taking your fruit and you're making strawberry jam, or you're taking your milk and making cheese or yogurt, or packaging your livestock as selling your livestock as packaged meats, right? Also, if you are raising your products in a specific way, so that it has a special character or identity, then it would also qualify. So if you're making GMO-free corn or growing organic berries, right? If your beef is your cows are grass-fed, your chickens are free-ranged, those kinds of things. So those kind of products would qualify under this program. In addition, they call out a couple of other things. Renewable energy, such as biodiesel, and products that are part of some sort of like a state branding effort or buy local campaign would also qualify. So who is eligible? This program is specifically for producers. And so you can only apply if you provide the majority of the raw commodity that's going into the value-added products. And for the most part, that's going to wind up being individual producers. And those can be farmers or ranchers. Also, harvesters are going to qualify. So foresters and fisher folk are eligible. In addition, there's kind of aggregates of agricultural producers. So whether that's a nonprofit member organization or a business venture that's made up of ag producers, or a farmer or rancher cooperative. All of those kinds of people would be eligible as well. So the grant program calls out some priority applicants, and it's to provide some special opportunities for these types of applicants. So if you fall into one of these categories, then essentially when your application gets evaluated, you'll get some extra points. So, and then just down at the bottom, that mid-tier value chain, those are going to be projects that focus on local or regional networks that are linking producers together, where the producers are small-scale family farms. So it turns out that the program, at least the 2025 program, had set aside certain special pools of money for specific project ideas. And so if you're an applicant that meets one of these criteria, then when you submit your application, initially you're just, you'll be competing for dollars in that pool. And in theory, that's going to be easier than competing in the general pool. And then if you don't get funded through the special pool, then you'll just, you'd be in the general pool as well. And as far as food safety projects go, those are ones that are specific to food safety and looking to increase market access through changes in food safety practices. So next I'm going to talk about the types of value-added producer grants. The first one is called a planning grant. And these, as the name suggests, these are going to support your planning activities. So generally, those are going to look at feasibility studies and business and marketing plans. So a feasibility study is going to focus on whether a project is technically achievable and whether it makes financial sense, right? They answer questions about, can we achieve this and should we bother? So the plans, on the other hand, are going to lay out things like what you want to achieve, how you want to achieve it, and what's going to be accomplished once the plan is executed. So planning activities need to be done by a third-party consultant. This is not work that you can just do on your own. And so that might be a private consultant, it might be a nonprofit organization, it might be a university might offer those services, but it's just not something that you can just do by yourself. The grants are eligible for up to $75,000, but mostly from what I've seen, they're significantly less than that, generally under 50,000, and maybe even less than that still. And typically, these projects are completed within a single year, and they're relatively uncommon. Only fewer than 10% of the applications are for planning grants. But let's go ahead and talk about some examples of some planning grants that were funded in Oregon in recent years. So Six Ranch raises grass-finished Corriente cattle in Wallowa County, and their project focused on switching from a cow share model to a cut beef model and then selling through their website. And then Blue Elderberry Farm was interested in learning what it would take to bring a blue elderberry syrup to market using the native blue elderberry. And turns out that most of the elderberry syrup that you see out there comes from berries that are imported from Europe. And they wanted to see if it was possible to do it with native berries that they were growing. Wallowa and Root were hog farmers who had a line of salumi products that they were selling through a retail outlet in Portland. And they wanted to look at the feasibility of selling that through wholesale channels. The regulations for selling wholesale were a lot more complex. And so they were doing a planning grant to be able to investigate that possibility. And then Statera sellers are grape growers, and they market their own wine. And they were looking at a project focused on financial modeling and expanding their business. So in addition to planning grants, there are also working capital grants. And these are going to be grants that are going to actually fund the operations associated with the value-added business. And so they're going to pay for a variety of eligible expenses, but almost exclusively dealing with processing and then marketing the value-added product. And these are a lot larger. They're up to $250,000, and often they're done over a 3-year funding period. So these are going to, in general, these are going to require more documentation in order to apply for the grant. Likely you're going to need a business plan and possibly a feasibility study. And the exception to that is if the project is smaller, if it's less than $50,000, then you don't need to have that kind of documentation. So let's look at some of the eligible expenses that would be covered. As I said, they're all going to be sort of downstream from production with a focus on processing and marketing. So marketing expenses, advertising expenses that might be covered. So that might be your marketing collateral. It might be branded packaging. It could be for you to buy online advertising to go after new customers. It can also cover salary for employees who are working in the value-added part of your business. So if you've got employees who are baking your granola or staffing your farmer's market booth or delivering your product to local markets or co-ops, their salaries could be covered under this grant program. You can also use the money to cover various kinds of accounting and sales software. So that might be QuickBooks or an e-commerce portal on your website, maybe GrazeCart or Shopify. And then you can also use the money for processing costs. So that might be if you're working with a co-packer, right? If they're taking your tomatoes and turning it into tomato sauce, you're providing the tomatoes, you're selling the finished product, and you can use the funds to pay the the co-packer for their work. You also can supplement the raw commodity that's going into the program. So if you don't have enough to make all the product that you're hoping that you're planning to sell, then you can purchase that from a partner farm, and that would be covered. The caveat there is that at least 50% of the raw commodity needs to be produced by you. You can also use the money to cover a variety of food safety projects and to meet other regulatory requirements. And you can use the money to buy small scale equipment. So that's going to be equipment that is with a unit cost less than $10,000, right? So maybe that's a food dehydrator, or it might be specialized packaging equipment, but each item would need to be less than $10,000. So in contrast, we can look at some of the things that are not, that you cannot cover with this grant. And some of it might seem like, but it's processing, or it's, it's for sales, but there are items that are explicitly excluded. And one of those is anything having to do with buildings or facilities. So if you're looking to build a farm stand or an on-farm processing space, the construction of that facility is ineligible. And then similarly, any equipment that's larger in scope, so if it costs more than $10,000, it's not going to be eligible, and that's even if it is processing equipment. And then again, the program is focused on kind of post-harvest, so nothing having to do with production or harvesting on the kind of the back end, getting your raw commodity to be ready to be used in your project. None of those expenses are covered. You can't use it for R&D. You can't use it, the money, for purchasing or repairing vehicles. And then it also stipulates that that costs outside the scope of the project aren't covered. So that could be money that you spent before the start date on the project, or it also could be expenses that aren't directly related to your value-added project. So for example, branding activities specific to your product, those would be covered. But branding relative to your whole business or your whole farm, those would not be eligible. So working capital grants kind of come in a variety of flavors. So first off, it are what are called emerging market projects. And these are going to be for products that have been in development for less than 2 years or are brand spanking new. Also, if you're getting into completely new geographies or are going after a new customer type. So if you've been selling retail and you're going to try to get into the wholesale market, those would all be considered emerging markets. So projects that fit in this category are going to require both a feasibility study and a business and marketing plan. So all applicant types are going to be eligible. And remember, the applicant types are the individual farmers or ranchers, as well as the groups of farmers. So any of those applicant types can apply for an emerging market project. Another kind of project is called a market expansion project. And these are going to be for products that have already been in development for more than 2 years. And the focus of these projects is going to be on creating new customers and expanding your revenues. So for this kind of a project, the documentation that's required to support it is only a business and marketing plan. You don't need the formal feasibility study. However, you are going to need to substantiate any claims that you make in your application. So it's great if you have a feasibility study that you can point to, but otherwise you can do your own research or have somebody help you do some research that substantiates the claims that you're making. For market expansion, working capital grants, only individual ag producers are going to be eligible. Oh, and just a note on the documentation. So the business plan that you need to provide should have the key components. So that's going to be things like your business goals, why you think your project is going to be successful, and then it's also going to need to have a pro forma, a projection of the financials for the project. So the food safety projects also are are eligible for the working capital funds. And in fact, these are eligible for the simplified projects. So you're not going to need to have the business plan and feasibility study in order to be able to put together one of these applications. So here are some examples of some working capital grants that got funded in Oregon. And I think that they show the breadth of uses for the working capital funds. And they also highlight the wide range of the products, the raw products that are going into these projects and the various kinds of activities that are being supported. So Deck Family Farms, they raise livestock and meat animals down in Junction City, and their project was focused on their pasture-raised poultry, and the funds were used to support the hiring of a marketing director. So Firebird Farms, they raise grass-fed yaks in Southern Oregon, and their project was focused on the direct-to-consumer sales of their various finished products. Kitamura Farms had a packaged onion product, and they used the funds for a variety of activities, including marketing and sales, and then selling both direct to consumer and through wholesale channels. A few more. Infinite Tree were organic hemp growers in Southern Oregon, and their project focused on increased staffing and enhancing marketing and packaging materials. Feather Goat Farm offered pasture-raised chickens and sustainably raised rabbits based in Baker City, and their project focused on packaging and labeling, and food safety, as well as some marketing activities. And then finally, Premium Growers have a line of Oregon hazelnuts that they grow in the Willamette Valley, and their grant was used to expand the line of products that they were bringing to market to add some new flavors. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the matching funds that are required for these projects. So for every dollar that you receive through this program, you're going to need to match it 1-for-1. And there's a handful of ways that you're able to do that. So up to half of your match amount can be done with your own sweat equity. So that's going to be hours that you and your family invest in the project. So if it's a planning grant, that likely is going to be research activities that go into putting together your feasibility study and business plan. If it's a working capital grant, then work you're doing related to things like processing and sales and marketing, those hours that you're not compensating yourself, those you can put toward the match. So beyond that, the rest of the match has to come from either cash or a variety of in-kind contributions. For planning grants, the in-kind contributions could include time that gets donated by the key project personnel. So if you're working with a consultant and that consultant donates some of their time toward the project, that can be used toward your match. Your match requirements. Yeah. And then if you're a working capital grant, then you can actually use the market value of the raw product that's going into the products that you're making as part of the grant. So essentially you're paying yourself for the raw commodity that's being used in the products. So here's an example, right? So if you let's say you're making cheese from your milk cows, and the cheese that you're going to be selling over the course of the 3 years and is going to use $200,000 worth of your milk, then that $200,000 can be put up as part of the match for the grant. So just a note on scoring. So cash matches are going to get you more points when your application is being evaluated, but you're going to need to figure out what's feasible for you. And I'm familiar with projects that have used almost exclusively the raw product value and had very, very minimal cash that they brought to the project. So let's talk a little bit about the application process. So typically the details get published at the Rural Development website and at the grants.gov website. And as of today, the 2026 information has not been released yet. So if you were to go up there, it would have the 2025 information and tell you that the grant program is closed. But the information you're going to be able to find are going to be the total amount of funding available for the entire program. It's going to have the application deadlines, and then it's going to have links to all of the minutiae of the grant regulations. So one of the things that you're going to need to do to participate in the program is you're going to need to register with the System for Award Management, or SAM, and you do that at the sam.gov site. Application window, yeah. So at this point, we don't know what that window is going to look like. In previous years, they used to open the grant program in January and then close it in April. Last year, they announced that for this year, they were going to, and going forward, they were going to try to open the window on November 1st. And close it on February 15th. Clearly, November 1st has come and gone. That didn't happen. So it's still TBD regarding when the actual window is going to open. And I will send that information out in a follow-on email to everybody who's registered for this webinar once we know what those dates are going to be. Anyway, the process is that you'll go online and you fill out your application, and then you submit the application as well through this grant portal. And then once you do, the application will get evaluated, and then the funding decision will be made in late September. Generally, that's been around August that we've heard. So just a note on this, getting access to the grant portal so that you can actually go ahead and submit your application. At least last year, which was the first year it was in that they were using it, it turned out it was a big pain. And even though in theory you can do all of that online, I and some other people that I knew actually had to go down to the Rural Development Office in order to be able to get verified and get into the system. So you'll want to take care of this as soon as possible once the grant program opens up. And similarly, to get to go through the registration with the SAM program, that can take up to a couple of weeks. So definitely don't want to save that to the very end. And then finally, the projects typically start on October 1st, which is the start of the fiscal year. So let's talk a little bit about what goes into a grant application. So once you go ahead and go online and you start filling out the information, the first thing they're going to ask for is some background information. So that's going to be things like the type of grant that you're applying for, what the timelines are, what kind of applicant type you are, what commodity you're planning to use in the project, what products you're going to be making, and what process you're going to be using, what value-added process you're going to be using. Next, there's a section for an executive summary. So this is going to be a high-level overview of your project. And even though this shows up fairly early in the grant application materials, I'm going to recommend that you work on that last, because once you've provided all the other information, then you can come back and tell that story in your executive summary. You're going to need to provide a detailed work plan and budget for the project. So this is going to be things like how you're going to meet your goals, and how the money is going to be allocated. And this is partly going to be in narrative form, and partly it's going to be filling out some tables. Next, there's going to be a discussion about what matching funds you're going to be bringing to the project, right? So that's that conversation I just had talked about a couple of slides ago regarding, is that in kind? Is it your sweat equity? How much of that is raw product? And how much of it is going to be cash? Next, they want you to talk about how you're going to be expanding your customer base and increasing your revenues. And they're going to want you to compare it with your current state. So you'll start with, what are your sales now? And then after you go through the grant program, at the end of the project, how do you imagine that's going to impact your sales? And for new projects or for planning grants, your current state could be, I don't have any sales, which is perfectly reasonable. So when you're working on the application, you can start it and then save your work and come back to it anytime. But it's once you submit your application, then you're done. You won't be able to make changes after submission. So some other parts of the application, there is an area where you're going to put in a detailed description of your project idea, and I'm going to describe that on the next slide. And then you'll also have a spot where you can upload your various support materials, so letters of support from key personnel on your project, your business plan if you've got one, your feasibility study if you've got one, and then a place to summarize any third-party research that you've done that's substantiating any claims that you're making in the application. So regarding the project idea, the first section is going to focus on technical feasibility. So they're going to want you to talk about what the value-added process is, go through the full description of how you take your raw commodity and you turn it into a finished product for sale. They're going to want you to talk about the availability of that commodity. So whether that you're producing it and you're producing sufficient crop on your farm, or raising sufficient livestock, or whether you're going to be supplementing that from another source. And then they're also going to want you to talk about who your potential customers are and how you're going to be reaching them, and which channels you're going to be distributing your products through. In the next section, you'll talk about the operational aspects of your project. So starting off with processing. So where are you going to have the processing done? Is that something you're going to be doing in a home kitchen? Is it going to be in a licensed facility? Are you going to work with a co-packer? So all of those details you're going to need to provide. Also talk about the labor that's involved in creating your value-added products, and speak to the availability of that labor. So do you already have staff? Are you going to be hiring staff? Is that work you're going to be doing yourself? So all of that information. Next, they're going to want to know about the logistics involved. So, and that's regarding things like storage or distribution, transportation. So all of those details. And then finally, they'll want you to talk to any challenges and risks that you're aware of, and also how you're planning on mitigating those risks. And then a third section around the project idea is focused on the dollars. So in what ways is this going to be profitable? How is it going to be economically sustainable once the grant program is over? And talk to your grant strategy. And so here, for the financial information, you should be able to reference your business plan for working capital dollars. And then for the planning grants, it turns out they also ask this question. So there you can just talk about why you think you're going to be able to sell your product, and this the scale that you think you're going to of sales that you're going to think you're going to have. And then you can also just say that the reason you're doing a planning grant is to validate some of those assumptions. So once you submit your grant, it's going to be reviewed and scored, and the application is going to be scored on a 95-point scale. And here, this is the way that those points get allocated. So each of the sections I just talked about regarding your project idea, the technical feasibility, the operational efficiency, and the profitability and economic sustainability, each of those is going to be available for 10 points. And then the personnel that are involved on your project, they're going to evaluate their qualifications and assign up to 20 points for that. And that's going to be both you and then your staff that's involved, and any partners or consultants that you're working with. The work plan and budget that you put together is also going to be worth 20 points. And there they're going to be evaluating, its quality, the level of detail. Is it complete? Did you give all the information they asked for? Those kinds of things. You also get 5 points each for information regarding matching funds and prior value-added producer grant assistance. So for matching funds, the more cash you bring to the project, the more points you're going to get. And as far as prior projects, if you have prior projects, you'll get fewer points than if this is your first value-added producer grant. I mentioned earlier that certain groups of applicants are eligible for priority points. So if you qualify, you will get the extra 5 points. If you don't qualify, you don't get any points. And then finally, USDA reserves 10 points that they consider discretionary. And they're going to allocate those points based on some internal criteria that they've determined, things like geographic diversity and whether the project is based in an impoverished county, some criteria like that they've used in the past. And they've got 10 points that they can allocate, and you have no control over that. They will, some or all of those points will be allocated based on their criteria. Okay, so I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about a couple of case studies. The first one is a planning grant, and this is the Blue Elderberry Farm project that I referenced earlier. It was a project I was involved with. And their interest was in bringing a blue elderberry syrup to market. And as far as we knew, this had not been done before with blue elderberry. And so the first part of the project was a feasibility study, really looking at questions around production and processing and some other issues related to specific to blue elderberry. And then once we were able to determine that it did seem like this was a feasible project, then the latter half of the project, we focused on building a business plan and then a marketing plan. So when we put the grant application together, this is the way that we framed the budget. So the total ask for the project was just under $50,000, $48,600. And all of the match for this grant was done with in-kind dollars. So they didn't bring any cash to this particular project. And then the activities involved, as I mentioned, were the feasibility study, the business plan, and the marketing plan. So another way to take a look at that, at those dollars, is through this task budget, right? So each of the so these are the dollars associated with each of the different activities. And there's essentially 3 sources for the dollars for each of these, right? Some of it is coming from the grant program itself. Some of it is coming from the owner's labor, and some of it was being donated by the various partners involved in the project. And so the owner labor equivalent, if you add up their in-kind amount, it comes to about just over $21,000, which is 22% of the total $97,000 project. So under the 25% cap. So less than half of the match was coming from owner sweat equity. And then the balance was coming from the consultants. So this is one way that you can structure a budget for a planning grant. This past year, I worked with a couple of clients who had slightly different budgets where they were actually bringing some cash to the project, but still, it was a combination of, dollars from the grant plus donated labor, both, from the owners and from their partners. So next, I'll talk about a case study for a working capital grant. So Massa Organics was one of my prior clients. They're based in Northern California, and they sell rice and almonds, and that they were distributing under their own farm label. And mostly when I was working with them, they were selling through farmers markets, and they did have a small online store, but they felt like that there was a lot of potential, and and online was definitely their most lucrative, had the highest margins of all of their channels. And so this project was going to focus on expanding their presence online. So the stated goals were to have a 4-fold increase in their online sales. And then they were going to do that through increasing the number of visitors to their website. And then as part of that, they were going to hire a person to handle the increased online sales. That wasn't something that they were hoping to do themselves. They were going to hire that labor. The specific activities including working with a branding agency who was going to do branding and photo and video assets, redesign the website, and create some new marketing materials. And then they were also going to work with an advertising consultant who was going to help them put together an advertising strategy via online and social media. So here's how they framed their application budget. So the project asked for the full $250,000 that they were eligible for, and some of the match came from in-kind. So that was the $25,000 you can see here. That's going to be time that the owners were putting into marketing and processing activities. And then the staff position that they added, they were just going to pay that directly through their business. And so that was considered part of a cash match. So between that and some just straight cash, that brought their cash match to about $50,000. So they had $25,000 in kind. And then the balance of their match was going to be raw product, right? So that's going to be the rice and the almonds that went into the products that they were selling as part of this project. So $250,000 in grant funding, and then between the cash match and the in-kind match, $255,000 in match covered that grant amount. So again, this is just one example of how you could frame a working capital budget. There's other ways of doing it, but this is just to give you some ideas. So let's talk a little bit about when it makes sense to go after a value-added producer grant. And for a planning grant, I would say it's going to make sense if you've got a new product idea, but you aren't sure about the technological feasibility or if it's going to pencil out financially, right? So these value-added producer grants or just value-added projects in general require a lot of time and money and attention, right? And you as producers, those things are very limited, right? So before you take on a big value-added project, it might make sense to do this kind of a study to just make sure that it makes sense to bring this forward. Also note that that any artifacts that come out of a planning grant, right? So the feasibility study or the business and marketing plan that you generate, all of those could be used to then apply for working capital grant in the future. So as far as working capital grants go, so I would say if you're an independent producer and you have more than 2 years experience selling a value-added product, then you're a great candidate for a market expansion working capital grant. You will need to have a business plan that has all the financial projections, but that's something that you could put together yourself, or you might hire out a consultant or work with somebody to put that together. On the other hand, if you have a new product or you're dramatically changing where you're selling to or who you're selling to, then it might make sense for you to go after an emerging market working capital grant. But remember that that is going to require some substantial documentation in order to apply. So you are going to have a feasibility study and a marketing plan in pocket to do that. So regardless, I'm going to assume that before applying that that you have your production practices pretty dialed in and are able to bring that raw commodity to market, that you have a pretty solid understanding of what your costs and revenues are and how the money moves through your business, and that you have a good idea of where you're going to find new potential customers. You're going to need to speak to all of that as part of your application in order to have a competitive application. And then regardless, you're going to have to be able to meet the match requirements, right? And so hopefully now you have some ideas of how you might go about doing that. So let me just wrap up with some tips for putting together your application. So, tip number one, definitely want to start this early. As I mentioned, the SAM registration can take up to a couple of weeks, and just all sorts of things can go wrong. So you don't want to save this for the last minute. So make sure you do your research and that you can document any claims that you're making, right? Think of this kind of as a like a college research paper. So you are going to need to talk about the fact that you are planning, that you are going to expand your sales, and but you're going to have to say why that's going to be successful, and back that up with some market research or your feasibility study and business plan. So make sure you're telling a compelling story, right? So these grant applications are going to be reviewed by humans, and humans definitely respond to a story. So it should be super clear what you're trying to accomplish, how you're going to accomplish it, why you think you're going to be successful, right? All of that should be super clear as part of the story in the application itself. I suggest that you roll up the tasks and activities that you're going to be doing as part of your grant into a small number of actual activities in the grant application, right? You're still going to need to have all the level of detail regarding what those activities are comprised of. But from a management perspective, it's just going to be easier if you have 2 or 3 or 4 activities rather than 10 or 12. So I'm also going to suggest that you make sure that you scale your project to the size of your business. It might not make sense for you to go after a full $250,000, right? If you're projecting sales under $50,000 a year, then asking for a smaller grant amount to match that might make more sense. So you are going to put together a grant budget and make it as part of your application. And it might make sense to have that reviewed by our state rep before you actually submit. And Christina has offered to be able to provide that service for folks, but please make sure you give her ample time to do that, right? Again, another reason to start early. She's got tons of things on her plate, but if you give her enough time, she should be able to take a look and make sure that your application is all in order. You're going to need to get written commitments from key personnel, whether that's a consultant that's doing your planning grant or a co-packer who's going to be doing your processing. And so you're going to want to get that in writing and be able to submit it as part of your grant application. And I think that's all I've got. So why don't we move into the Q&A session? If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And then when Andrew will call on you, and then you can unmute your mic and ask your question. And I just ask that you please keep your questions as brief as possible. So with that, Andrew, you want to kick that off?
Got one in the chat already. Someone put it in here.
Okay.
So we'll start with that one. What is the max rate per hour for sweat equity? $25 per hour?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit sticky. I've seen people use numbers in the $40 to $60 range. It depends on the activities that you're doing. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go online and find some comps of people doing those kinds of activities, and then be able to sort of put links in and say, yes, I did my research, and people who are doing this kind of work sort of earn in this kind of a range. But those are the numbers that we've used on the grants that I've been a part of in the past, and those numbers have been accepted.
How do you prove sweat equity? Do you need to prove it in some way, reporting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so you'll want to just track that through the course of the project. Obviously, you're not punching a time clock, but keep a journal, whether that's online or just a written journal. And so on a given day, I put in so many hours, and I worked on these kinds of activities. So if it's a planning grant, I did research, or I talked to a co-packer, or I talked to ODA, whatever it is. Or I spent time working with my consultant, right? Just log all those hours, and then you'll just report those out.
Great. There's a couple more questions in this.
Yeah,
Start
let's go.
selling or marketing the value-added product. October start date. Is that I think they're asking, like, do you start selling it then, or you start? I think what you do is you're starting the process, right? If you get awarded, then you're starting the what you
That's right. Yeah, so the October 1st date is when you can start having activities that you can then bill to the grant. So it's perfectly reasonable for you to start on your project sooner than that, but any of those activities that happen before October 1st, you wouldn't be able to be reimbursed through the grant. So yeah, whatever makes most sense for your project. So you don't have to wait, but if you're planning on paying for the activities with funds from the grant, you would have to wait till after it officially starts on October 1st.
Is there and this might be a quick question for Christina, a list of the impoverished counties? How do they know if they're in that bucket?
I will throw that over to Christina. Do you happen to know?
Are you asking for like the discretionary points?
You mentioned you mentioned that if you are in an impoverished county, and how do you tell whether you are in a county or not? That is,
Yeah, I think that's the discretionary points. Yeah.
So we actually did not award discretionary points last year. Oh, Mandy, our program director might chime in as well.
Hi, everyone. Mandy Cole. I'm the Rural Business and Cooperative Program Director for Oregon. Yeah, so just to answer that, all of that should be outlined when when it's put out in the notice for the Federal Register. It will lay out if there's discretionary points and how to go about what those look like. And if that is the case, typically there will be maps that are provided if you're in that area.
Nice. Question on the technical assistance. Do you provide that, Rich? I think it was a question to you for these grants.
So yes, so I've had a handful of value-added producer grant clients, and I've done the planning grant side of it. So I've done feasibility studies, and I've also written business and marketing plans. And so I guess, yeah, not to plug myself, but I do have capacity to work with a handful of folks in the coming year. And then I guess the other service that I provide is I've worked with people on their working capital grants, just doing review and helping them. I mean, these grants are pretty complicated, and certainly if everyone's capable of filling them out, but some of the information they're asking for is a little bit arcane, and so I've provided some services for folks where just reviewing their grants and kind of talking through where the information goes and how to organize it, to help polish the grant application.
Nice. And you'll be doing a follow-up with attendees to, yeah.
That's right. And so, yeah, so let me mention that. I had neglected to talk about it earlier. So, so for all the folks who participated in the webinar, you're eligible to have just a one-on-one brief meeting with me, and we can. These are half-hour sessions, and you can tell me about your project idea, and yeah, I can tell you whether how I think. Well, whether I think you're a good candidate and how you should frame the project, which pieces of your value-added venture might best be funded by this project. And I'm happy to do that. That's no cost to you, and I think there'll be 10 to 12 slots. So I'll be sending out a follow-on email with information on how to sign up for those. So look for that, and then yeah, if you're interested, you can sign up for one of those slots.
Great. Question on if this will be offered in 2027, this grant opportunity.
So I'm not going to predict what Congress is planning to do with the Farm Bill. Historically, they have continued to fund, to put a pool of money aside for the value-added producer grant program. Your guess is as good as mine. So I'm hopeful that they'll continue to fund this program. I think it's a really great program. I know a number of people who've received these grants, and it's been a real game changer for their businesses. And hopefully, Congress and the USDA will continue to see the value there. But it's hard to know the future.
Nice. Good point there. Is this a reimbursable grant, or do payments happen up front? How does that happen?
Yeah, so it's all reimbursable. So you'll want to work. So, for example, for myself with the planning grant work that I've done, then I just, I do the work, I submit an invoice, and then I get paid through the grant after the work is completed. The way that the funds flow through the grant, any cash that you're putting up will need to be spent first before you can start spending down grant funds. But yes, all of the expenses are going to wind up being reimbursable.
Do you know the cadence
Yeah.
of that? So is it monthly once you start doing those reimbursements?
So it's up to you. Yeah, so it's the paperwork for submitting for reimbursement is it's not substantial, but there is something to it. And so clients I've worked with have gone on a maybe every other month or quarterly basis, something like that. For the longer term working capital grants, again, it partly depends on how the cash is flowing through the project. So I imagine there are some projects where it makes sense. The money is being spent on a fairly regular cadence. It might make sense to invoice for reimbursement more regularly, and others where it might make sense to just do it more periodic.
Great. All right. We got another one here. Matching funds are only required for the working capital grant, not the planning grant?
Incorrect. All grants have to have matching funds, and so for the planning grant, those matching funds could be cash out of pocket, it could be your sweat equity, and it could be time donated sort of in kind through the project. So just as an example, I mentioned that that project I worked on with Blue Elderberry Farm, just the way that the various consultants on the project structured their billing, some of it they billed to the grant, and some of it they essentially donated to the project. And then the owners also put in a fair amount of work into the research that went into the project, and then their sweat equity counted as part of the match.
Great. What if a farm is already established with value-added products? Do they have to start do they have to go through the working capital grant, or can they also do a planning grant?
No, they can also do a planning grant. Again, it depends on the venture that you're looking at. So if you are in a position, so how do I want to phrase this? A lot of folks that I've worked with are eager to get the working capital money, right? They've got a project, and they want to have, help funding that project and getting it off the ground. But for, if you're in a position where you have a lot of uncertainties, or you're not going to have a competitive grant application without, because you don't have the feasibility study, you haven't been doing that particular product for long enough, or you're just curious, there's, you really want to do a deep dive to see, does this even make sense? And you'd like to have somebody do that work for you. Then planning grants absolutely make sense. And we've definitely worked planning grants with folks who have, long established businesses and even value-added products that they've brought to market already.
Nice. That's great. Can funds be allocated to compensate independent contractors?
Yes. I mean, it depends on the activity, assuming that the activity that those contractors are doing falls under one of the eligible criteria, then yes.
Great. Can matching funds come from a written guarantee of future funds, such as a business loan or investor? If is coming from personal funds, do you have to show evidence of cash in hand?
So actually, I'm going to defer that one to Christina. I think I know the answer, but yeah, why don't you take a stab at that?
Yeah. So if you have a business loan for your match, like you will submit the proof that you have approval from the bank that you've got that loan. But if you're like, no, I'm using personal funds, yes, you'll have to provide like a bank statement or something showing the cash on hand. And I think Mandy wants to chime in.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't. But yeah,
Oh,
that's correct, Christina.
okay.
Just keep in mind that you do have to have that loan approved. It can't be where you're pre-approval. You have to have that cash readily available, ready to use when that project starts and when you submit the application. So you're going to have to show proof that that's available when you do move forward as well.
Very clear. That's our questions in the chat.
All right, and we're just about out of time. So thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully that was informative. And again, I'll be following up after this. There'll be a link to the recording of the webinar, and then hopefully there'll be information about the grant for the 2026 with information about like the grant window, although we're not quite sure when that's going to be released. And then I'll also have information about how you can sign up for one of the one-on-one sessions with me. And I'll be holding those sessions in December and early January. And in the meantime, if you'd like to reach out to me, you can see my contact information here on the screen. So yeah, I think that's about everything. Anything else from you, Andrew or Christina?
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. This is a really great opportunity for folks to learn. And thanks for having Christina and Mandy here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right.
We'll be following up with everybody.
Okay.
Bye.